Fashion's history is filled with stories of names and faces that shook the industry, and those stories often go the same way. A young talent bursts onto the scene, burns hot, burns bright, but doesn't burn long. But in one case, that young talent also made history as the first black model to grace the cover of Vogue magazine. Some have forgotten her name, and some never knew she existed. But that's all about to change with the new documentary, DONYALE LUNA, Supermodel.
My complete name is Peggy Anna Danielle Zazia Luna Freeman.
What sort of racial mixture do all those names come from?
It's like a melting pot of, say, different nationalities, different people, everything.
DONYALE Luna was like something ethereal. If she walked into this room, the whole place would just float.
I think some people thought that she was from another planet. She did not look like any human being I had ever seen or met.
Director Nailah Jefferson was a filmmaker of both documentaries and narrative fiction, with critically acclaimed projects including Vanishing Pearls and Descended from the Promised Land, The Legacy of Black Wall Street. So it was no surprise the story of a black supermodel who the majority of the black community did not know would be an intriguing project to take on. And so the challenge of discovery of a piece of fashion history worthy of celebration, but marred by tragedy, was set in motion.
Judita DaSilva from Arise News Nigeria. Lovely to have you. And it's Nailah Jefferson. Is that Nailah?
Nailah.
Nailah. Okay, Nailah Jefferson. So you are no stranger to documentaries. You did Vanishing Pearls. You did Descended from the Promised Land, The Legacy of Black Wall Street. But they're more like journalistic, gritty, investigative. This is fashion. So why the move to fashion, and why DONYALE Luna's story?
I don't really see it as like a move to fashion, but to be honest, growing up, I always loved models. So for me, this is not foreign at all. And I mean, we can have varied interests, right? But again, I never saw this story as a move to fashion. It's just steeped in the fashion world. But when you think about the themes that come out of my films a lot of it is about social justice, and there is that theme in this film. A lot of it is about really taking a deep look into race relations in America, and that's what this film is about. But DONYALE Luna was a very complex woman, and so I don't think any filmmaker would read her story and turn away from it. She's one of the most fascinating people I've ever heard about, read about, learned about, and so for me, this was just it made complete sense to dive into her world, and through fashion and through the fun and kind of fantasy of fashion, and even the fantasy that Luna provides, introduce larger and probably more important themes like race relations, like social justice, like colorism, and like racism within the fashion industry.
In the limited time that DONYALE Luna lived, hers was a life filled with complexity and nuance, and one of the fascinating parts of the documentary is how that complexity is explored through DONYALE Luna's daughter, Dream, who was only 18 months old at the time of her mother's passing, and like us, the audience, she too has had to discover Luna through the pieces of her life she left behind.
They always said to her, "Where are you from?" And she'd always say, "My name is Luna. I'm from the moon."
When I saw her, I just realized what great potential she had as a model. I said, "If you're ever in New York, give me a call."
He knew something that I didn't know. To go to New York was like Alice in Wonderland.
People would literally stop, her face red from blocks away.
She was in London, she was in Paris, she was in Italy.
She hung around with Mia Farrow, she hung around with the Rolling Stones. She broke the mold of using black models in the 60s?
So in the documentary, it's almost told through her daughter's perspective, because it's through the writings and her diary entries and all the things she wrote, and her daughter's reading them. And so it's almost as though DONYALE LUNA is the omniscient narrator in a retrospective on her life. So it has this very eerie feeling to it. And then when you delved into that thing about DONYALE LUNA is a construction. She's Peggy Ann Freeman, American from Detroit, American accent, not this exotic creature of no distinction with a bizarre accent. But then I thought to myself that, yes, people create personas, everyone from Michael Jackson to Beyonce, but there's a tragedy to hers because she had no desire to return to herself afterwards. Why do you think that was such a thing, that self-loathing was so plaguing to her in her life?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call it self-loathing. I think it was a coping mechanism. When we learn about DONYALE's life, she didn't create this persona when she became famous, and she didn't create it to become famous. She created it so that she could cope within a very volatile family structure. And not only that, she was also shunned by her peers at a very young age. And so I think creating DONYALE LUNA, instead of kind of maybe holding up in her house and not leaving her room or something like that, she said, okay, I need to create for myself a world where I can exist and see myself as beautiful and imagine something outside of the despair that was all around her. And so for me, the creation of DONYALE LUNA is kind of an act of bravery, because so often we get stuck in our situations and we can't dream or see ourselves out of it. Now, unfortunately, she couldn't bring Peggy Ann Freeman out of the situation she was in. She had to totally create something new. And I do think eventually in her life that became harder. Because she said to Pat Cleveland at one point in the film, she says, I'm just a girl from America. So I do think she struggled with the duality of who she was. And so I think that's just something for us to meditate on and think about because it's bigger than just a persona, right? It's really where her mental state was. And
she
how
does say in the documentary, you said that she said that, I wish I was a white woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. So that does come from a place of self-loathing, because we know in the Black community that the deifying of the white aesthetic marginalizes and suppresses your own value. So she lived in that space that a lot of Black people do live in.
She did, but here's where I think we need to kind of tread a little lightly when it comes to, I feel like self-loathing is a very, very strong word. And maybe you loathe one part about yourself, but I don't know that means you loathe every part about yourself. And I agree, when you're a Black person in America, and I'm in other places too, because the whole world was colonized, quite frankly, and these certain beauty standards were set up, and that is not what she reflected, even though you look at her today and she's just so arresting, because she is quite one of the most beautiful people I've ever seen in my lifetime. But it's very sad that she couldn't see it in herself. And so when we think about the self-loathing, I think we also need to think about the systems that we live in that perpetuate that, right? And so I just always wanted to be careful about how we looked at Luna. And these aren't just ideas that, she grew up, I hate my Black skin. These are things that are taught and learned and seen. And how can we, through this film, undo that thinking, and hopefully to other little girls out there, because this was not just a problem of DONYALE LUNA. People are still dealing with it today. How do we then reach those people without making them feel judged by saying, you hate yourself, but get to the why and then try and undo all the damage that has been done?
The name and legacy of DONYALE LUNA may not ring out in the fashion industry like those of other models of her time, but as awareness of who she was and what she did grows, recognition of her achievements is taking hold where it counts, in those that have taken up the mantle for the presence and celebration of Black beauty in high fashion.
In the TV show, The Supermodels, Naomi Campbell mentions that she stands on the shoulders of Iman and DONYALE LUNA. but she wanted more. She wanted to get the same thing they were giving white models. So in 1987, she demanded she gets a Vogue cover, and Vogue didn't know how to respond. And I just thought to myself, like, if DONYALE LUNA had been brassy, because getting a racist person to be racist to your face, it's so much harder for them. So that's what Naomi, because she has that personality. So do you think, just theoreticizing, had DONYALE LUNA had a Naomi Campbell personality, she could have raged against the machine and made those strides a bit like more possible for her?
Well, I think we also have to think about the time. DONYALE LUNA was 20 years before Naomi Campbell. So, and DONYALE was the first. She didn't have any shoulders to really stand on. She didn't have an example. She didn't have someone to say, wait a minute. And I think in a way that Naomi Campbell was able to look at DONYALE LUNA and say, she is extraordinary. She should have had this, this, and this. I'm demanding that. DONYALE LUNA didn't have those examples. And from what I know of her, it seems like she did have a pretty fierce personality. In order to get to that space, in order to exist in those spaces for even a short amount of time, you have to have a certain amount of tenacity and toughness. And I believe that she did, but I also believe that she bared the scars from her childhood. And so there's only so much that you can deal with in life. And maybe this was a fight that she just couldn't take on. I'm not sure. But I do think it would have been helpful if she had community. I don't know if she had community amongst the white models of the day like Naomi Campbell did, who told her, this is what we're getting paid, this is what you should demand, and also backed her up and said, if you don't get this, then we won't participate. I don't think DONYALE had that type of solidarity with anyone in her community.
Because in the beginning, you see, when Beverly Johnson comes on, you see that you ask, oh, DONYALE LUNA, and she's like, oh, I'm sorry, who's that? And then you see her whole journey of discovering this person, because like I modeled for 10 years, and in the world of high fashion, for Black models, we have a holy trinity that is Beverly Johnson, Iman, and Naomi Campbell. They're the mother, the daughter, and the Holy Ghost. And we all think that Beverly Johnson, first Black woman in Vogue, and then you hear of DONYALE LUNA, and all of us just go, how could I not know? But then you delve deeper and just, I think like in a weird way, I felt bad, but then I said to myself that, can I be held responsible? Because can one expect recognition from people you didn't recognize yourself when you were in that space?
I think, the not knowing Luna is also complex, as complex as Luna is. I think there's the one that she wasn't really very involved in her community. There's the two, the not owning her Blackness a lot. But then there's also, I think, if we look into the fashion industry and we say, well, why didn't you all tell us? You have the pictures, you have the covers. Why didn't you all give us this information? Then they also have to explain to us what happened to Luna. And her career was really blocked. She ascended so quickly. So, the first Black woman on the cover of Harper's Bazaar, months into living in New York. And then she does the same thing in London when she gets there in 66. Within months of being there, she's the first Black woman on the cover of British Vogue. And how does someone who has this extreme success, who looks the way she does, how is she not successful? And again, the fashion industry, I think, has to take some responsibility in not holding her up as the first. But then again, when we ask the why, I think then they have to answer those questions. Well, it's because perhaps people who are in power, who we still revere today, contributed to her downfall.
Richard Avedon was one of the greatest fashion photographers of all time.
He was willing to sign her up for a contract.
Too extreme for Vogue. Are you kidding me? Rejected.
I know I'm the best model, so why aren't I being photographed?
DONYALE LUNA's being was discounted because she was a Black woman and she wasn't even regarded as a full person by most.
As a human, what she would have experienced in being on the receiving end of that backlash is horrific.
Nailah Jefferson's documentary presents DONYALE LUNA with the honesty of her humanity. She was a divine beauty with a fractured soul, in an industry that would not embrace her potential. However, the very nature of that industry inadvertently immortalized her in photographs that keep her perfectly preserved in time. And with time comes change, and with change comes possibility. the possibility of a renewed life for the legacy of Luna.
Recently, we saw Zendaya and her stylist, Law Roach, do that magazine spread recreating some of Donyale Luna's iconic looks.
Yeah.
And I just had this instinctive reaction and say like, oh yeah, that makes sense. A mixed race girl would find a connection just looking aesthetically at Donyale Luna. And then watching the documentary again, I just thought to myself that it's a bit sad because I know what my opinion is, but I'll keep it to myself. Do you think that in the fullness of time, the Black community, the way we are, will ever feel about Donyale Luna the way we feel about Beverly Johnson, Iman, and Naomi Campbell?
We may over time. A lot of people are just being introduced to her, right? Even though she was definitely working at least 5 to 10 years before Beverly Johnson was. But we're just reintroducing her to the world. So perhaps they will. Unfortunately, we haven't had the time with her. So I'm not sure. We've had a lifetime with Beverly Johnson, with Iman, with Naomi Campbell. Fortunately, they are past their 50s. Donyale only lived to 33. So hopefully through this film, and that was always the goal of the filmmaking team, is that we wanted to uplift Luna and allow people to love her in a way that she wasn't able to be loved when she was here on this earth. So I hope they do. And and the truth is, there are some controversial statements she made. There are controversial ideas she had. But she did leave us with a beautiful body of work that I think is arresting and breathtaking. And so I don't know that anybody will know Donyale Luna like they know these other women. I think we know their personalities. We've heard their interviews, things like that. We don't, unfortunately, have that through Luna. But through the journal she left us, I think we get a bit of her heart and her mind and her soul. And so hopefully we can get to know her. And maybe she won't reach those heights, but I think we'll love her in a different way, which is okay.
Because everyone I've spoken to has always said like she's just breathtakingly beautiful. But she's problematic. And because you've made this great documentary, and thank you and congratulations for actually making it. It's so needed, but it's come at this lightning time of social media where everyone is such a purist about their beliefs that if you waver in your solidarity, you're just not good enough. So she's going to get a kind of 2023 harshness, but at least there's awareness. Don't you think so?
I think that's fair. I think people should be able to have their opinions. I totally get it. I have parents who participated in the civil rights movement, but they also, when they heard this story, they didn't have one shred of judgment. So again, I'm not someone who had to walk that walk in the 60s and 70s. And if I myself, who didn't have to stand up and fight like they did back in the 60s, if I can talk to my parents about it and they can look at her and not have any judgment, not have any condemnation against her, then I don't think I should either. I should just be able to listen to this woman, see what her life was like. I don't agree with some of the decisions that she made at all, but I can also say, okay, this was her Black experience. And again, I do think we need to realize the system that we're in. We're so quick to judge Black people, brown people, people who are marginalized, people who are really trampled upon in life, and say, well, you should do this, you should do this. And I don't think hold enough of that fire for the system. This is a reaction to being in an oppressive system. Self-hate, self-loathing, denying who you are. It's all a result of that. And so I think if we put more energy into trying changing these systems and really care for and maybe have a bit more grace for people who are not as strong, I think we would go a little farther.
Well, Nailah Jefferson, sorry about that. Thank you so much for talking to us, and bravo again on a truly wonderful piece of work with this documentary.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it. And I thank you for this conversation. These are the conversations we wanted to have around Donyale. It's not an easy subject. She was not an easy woman. But I think that's the more reason why we need to have more stories like that out here.
What motivated Luna's confusing and sometimes concerning choices for her life will only ever truly be known by the woman herself, which only adds to the mystery of the otherworldly beauty that once graced the pages of fashion editorials the world over. But whether or not you agree or disagree with DONYALE LUNA's choices, it is undeniable that she was Black, she was beautiful, and she made history.
Where is the place where finally I'm seen for who I am, and I am loved for who I am?
DONYALE LUNA was the first Black woman to be on the cover of Vogue. Why don't we know more about her?